Thank you, thank you. Buenos dias, buenos dias. Let me see, we're recording. Put a, I'm gonna test the chat. I like to interact with my audience and we're a small group, so I will be doing that. Put a 2 in the chat if it's afternoon where you are, because here it's 7 a.m. I had to wake up at 5 to get ready for this. So put a 2 in the chat if this is afternoon time for you. Okay, we have, let me find the chat. Good. Okay, so we have some afternoons, we have some mornings. Here in Arizona, it is 7 a.m. And it's truly an honor to be included in this group. When I was a graduate student, I wish I would have known about a group like this because I would certainly needed the company and benefited from it. So thank you so much for including me, for thinking of my work, and for this invitation. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to set my timer so that I'm mindful of our time. I'm going to set it for 14 minutes and let's see how I do. Before I start my presentation, I like to ask all of you a very important question. And if you can put in the chat, I'm trying to find the chat here. Where is the chat? Here it is. There we go. Now I have it here. I like to work with my chat in hand because I wanna be interactive so that we're all awake. Oh God, military time. You guys are using military time. Who did that? Excellent. So I want to ask you guys a very, very important question. Have any of you ever enjoyed a delicious, where is this? Hot dog from a street vendor? Please put a 3 in the chat if you've ever enjoyed a delicious hot dog from a street vendor. Any 3? Okay, good. I have some of you. Excellent. Now put a 4 if you've ever had corn on the cob. Anyone, any 4s? Corn on the cob, and you can still put some 3s if you're, okay. How about pupusas? Put a 5 in the chat if you've ever had some pupusas. And I see Jessica saying yes, maybe, no? So 5's good. It's from street vendors, okay? Not at home, not from family members, from street vendors. Now, I should see everybody's, put a 7 if you've ever had tamales from street vendors. A 7, everyone? That used to be my go-to when I was at USC and I would take the bus to go to school. I would switch buses in downtown LA and I would have a delicious tamal with a champurrado. Put an 8 and actually put a 100 if you've ever had tacos from street vendors. A 100. I want to see some 100s. Good. I really miss them. Here in Arizona, I haven't found a good taco place. So I miss my tacos from Los Angeles. Very, very good. So I study not food, right? Like not food, but the people, the families that make and sell these types of food in the streets of Los Angeles, right? As you see here, these are some pictures that I took from when I was in the field. And my focus is not on the adults. Plenty of literature has focused on adult street vendors, the reason why they resort to street vending. I wanted to understand the role of children in this family economic business. I wanted to understand their role. What is it that they do? What does it mean to them? How do they start street vending? Why is it important to them? Are they told to street vend? Do they make the decision to street vend? How do they feel about this, doing this type of work that it's seen in Los Angeles as anachronistic, out of time, out of space? This is something that is done in other countries and not something that's done in the US. And when I started my research and I would share with my friends and colleagues about what my work was going to be about, they would tell me, that's so smart of you to design a project that takes you out of the US. You get to travel and you get to go to Mexico, and they would imagine places that I would go to study this. And I would say, this is happening outside of USC. This is happening outside of the gates of USC. And they wouldn't understand that street vending and the role of children and children working was something that was happening in our own backyard, right? Because we have these ideas of what are proper places and spaces for children and activities. So I want to ask the audience, put in the chat what you imagine would be safe spaces or where places where children belong, right? Like when you imagine children, what are some spaces or places or activities that they should be engaging with? Can you put in the chat what comes to your imagination, what you've been told, what it's libraries? What else do we see? Anthony is the only one that's engaging with me. Come on. All right, home. What else? What else? Well, now it's just home, right? Because of the times that we're living, but that we're being asked to stay at home, but parks, schools, um, and so this tend to be like private spaces, right? The private sphere, places where they're being protected and taken care of by other adults, right? And that's not what I saw in my research. I saw the youth being involved in working outside on the street, doing activities that may be seen as activities that are relegated to adults, being involved in the family's economy and being co-economic contributors in the household. And that's what this research focuses on, and that's what it's about. And why study children? My book, as Michael shared earlier, is titled Kids at Work. And for today's presentation, I will be focusing on chapter 4, and also I have some quotes from chapter 7. But of course, if you have any questions about anything in the book, there's a chapter that I dedicate um, to the site specifically, contextualizes the historical component. There's a section that I have on street violence, on gender, on education. Feel free to ask any questions about anything that comes to mind. Um, so the research questions that I have and that I engage with in the book are these. And these are again, the questions that I try to answer in the book. Well, the first one is, what social conditions did these families encounter in the US that enable or constrain them to street vend? That's really important because there's this idea that street vending is a cultural transplant from Latin America. And that's not the case. In the book, I talk about how street vending has always taken place in the US. And I talk about the different immigrant groups that have used street vending as a strategy, as an economic strategy in places like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, etc. And it's not just something that's relegated to Latinx populations. The other is, what role do children play in street vending family business? Again, thinking like my colleagues, right? Like, oh, this is something that happens in Asian countries, in Mexico, in Central America, but not in the US. Now that we know that children are working, what activities do they do in this family economy? What are they actually cooking? Are they preparing the food? Are they looking for street vending sites? How involved are they in this family business? The third question is, does children work in the family alter parent-child relationships in the household? This is really centered in the immigration literature because the literature tells us that after immigration, after migration, the role of parents in the household changes because now a spouse or the wife or the husband works outside of the house, and that changes the decision making within the household. In my work, I'm able to see, well, now that children are working, how does that impact the role that children play within the household? And that's again another question that I'm engaging with. The fourth question is, how do immigrant families navigate integration into the U.S. when their work places them so publicly and visibly in opposition to the country's laws and social expectations? Again, and this goes more into the cultural expectations of, like you placed in on the chat, like how do we imagine children should be taken care of? Where are these spaces more appropriate for them? And also street vending being an illegal activity at the time that I was conducting my research, right? That there wasn't an avenue for the families to get a street vending permit. Probably you guys are all very familiar with this literature, but in my work, I engage with the changing conceptions of what it means to be a child throughout history and how that has changed over time. Viviana Salaiser and other researchers look at how children went from being seen as economically useful to now emotionally priceless and in need of protection, right? And in my book, I have a whole chapter dedicated to that changing conception of what it means to be a child and the activities that are appropriate for children in our society. And also the, not the exceptions, but in our time today, we see various examples of children being involved in economic activities. I mean, it's simply turning on the TV, right? And we see many child actors that are in shows that are almost entirely for children and by children. We also see places in the Midwest, for example, where children are involved in family farms, etc., where they're very involved in the family economy. In Los Angeles, we see children working with their parents in other informal economic activities. For example, I grew up working with my parents both in Mexico and in the US. So for me, the role of children being involved in the family economy was something that was not so strange, but I can see how in the US it is there's different expectations of what children should be doing. Some study implications. The work that I did and the observations that I did took place on the street. So this is again another picture from my field side. And street vending at the time was illegal. It took place in the public sphere where they were exposed to customers, urban traffic, immigrant xenophobia, racism, government officials like the police, health inspectors, social workers. So you can imagine how interesting it was when I showed up in the field, and then people were afraid of me, right? Because they thought I was a police officer, health inspector, etc. Time is really flying by, so I will skip to some of the findings that I have. I want to contextualize that in Los Angeles, 61% of the informal workers are undocumented immigrants. So again, this is very telling of who's resorting to these informal occupations in Los Angeles. And also, while I was finishing the book, street vending in Los Angeles was decriminalized. So again, that's a very important historical context. I would invite researchers and people who are still interested in doing this type of work to look at how the role of children in the field has changed as a result of the decriminalization in Los Angeles. Still, children in the literature are portrayed as passive agents, right? For example, Hamilton and Chinchilla in their book have this citation that said, street vending was particularly useful for women with small children, and sometimes women would sell in groups to facilitate childcare. Again, the idea here is that children, when they are on the street, it's because they are being taken care of. Parents are bringing them with them. But again, that's not what I saw. I saw children being actively working both on the front end, on the streets, but also on the back end when it came to preparing food, cutting food, cooking the food, bagging the food, and strategizing of where they could street vend when some places were no longer available due to the surveillance of the police. Because we have a wide audience, I wanted to include a map to show where my research took place. So my research was in California, where the majority of the population is Latino. More specifically, my research took place in Boyle Heights near USC, where again, 94% of the population is Latino. This is just a snapshot of my sample. I conducted interviews with children, but I also did family interviews because I wanted to get the family perspective and the perspective of parents as well. So at first I studied children by themselves. Then I included families, 15 families that included parents. And I also have a small comparison sample where I interviewed parents who street vend and the children are not involved in the street vending work, doing any type of street vending work. And during the discussions, I can answer questions about the rationale behind including that comparison sample. I spent 3 years in the field doing observations in addition to the interviews. And I asked all of the youth to give me a overview of their week. What is it that they're involved in? And as you can see here, all of them were in school. They helped their parents after school, and they all contributed to the family economy anywhere from $120 to $200 on a regular day. And here we have another example, and these are also in the book. For the purpose of the talk, I want to highlight these two quotes. The work that the children did, although they talked about how much they learned from their work, right? It was very stigmatized labor, again, because of it being illegal, because of it being seen as Mexican, something that is done outside of the US. And the children were US born, right? Some of them had never been to Mexico, and they had to really find ways to counter the stigma that they encounter on a regular basis while doing their work. For example, Veronica said to me, they used to tell me, you sell in the streets, aren't you embarrassed? People look at you and you have to tell them to buy you stuff. So they were making fun of me. And they tell me that I'm right here in the streets like a Mexican person selling in the streets. People tell me, you're a wetback. I wanted to cry because they were making fun of me, but then I got over it. And again, this is something that happened over and over, where their peers, customers, and others who they saw on the streets would tell them to go back to Mexico, that they look like a Mexican person. Here she added, when the cops stopped us, we can't sell that day because they already stopped us. We have to be hiding behind the bushes. Sometimes we even feel like criminals because we have to hide behind the bushes. And like cars pass by a lot. They're just looking at us like weird, like running and hiding and looking and ducking from the cops. So again, in this example, she talks about how they have to hide behind the bushes, behind the cars when police officers pass by, and how that makes her feel like a criminal. Um, it's important to highlight that they weren't, just seeing themselves as victims, but they also found pride in the work that they did. Um, and they use those narratives that were used against them to define their work, and they define themselves in opposition to those narratives. They saw them as being hard workers, I'm a good boy and a girl because I'm a good daughter because I help my parents, and I'm not a criminal, I'm not a gang member, I'm not a fresita, a spoiled little girl. And again, they found pride in the work that they did, and in those narratives that were used against them. Um, I ran out of time. It is 15 minutes, but I want to end with this quote that I really I like this quote. I like this concept that I develop in the book, and along with finding pride in their work, children and parents found and developed economic empathy. And this is what economic empathy looks like, because they did this work together, because they worked side by side. And as you saw Veronica explaining, they had to hide from the cops and they had to experience this xenophobia from customers. They developed a special bond that I called and coined economic empathy. And this is how Mother defined this concept that I develop in the book. She said, my daughter is living what I'm doing. And that's key, right? It's not that they hear conversations about their work experience, but they live what they're doing. She knows, for example, Leticia knows that I get the ticket citations. She knows about the police, having to work in the rain, the water, everything. All of my kids also know about this, but they don't live it. Again, this empathy, right, that develops from a working relationship. My relationship with Leticia is more of attachment, of pegamiento. What happens is that she is a girl and I have more trust with her, confianza in everything. With my sons, we talk less. They're less attached to me. Why? For the same reasons. They don't interact, conviven with me. So I'll leave you with that quote. I have many more, but I also have 15 minutes and I want to make sure that we have time for discussion. Um, and I will stop sharing my screen. Um, again, I had many more quotes, but this will be just a teaser. You can get the book and read all about it on your own time. But it's important to recognize that context matters. The relationship that the children develop with the parents is aligned with the work that they have to do together. And economic empathy helps us explain why they opt to street vend, right? Why they decide to street vend. And even if sometimes they don't feel like waking up early and doing this type of work. Michael, I turn it back to you, and I look forward to the discussions that will take place in the breakout rooms. And hopefully I can be part of those discussions as well.